shoulders loosen. Let your hands relax. Let your breathing slow, little by little. In and out, softly, quietly. There is nothing you need to solve now, nothing you need to hold, nothing you need to carry into this moment. Only this quiet room, only this gentle voice, only the small sounds around you, the hush of the air, the stillness of the night, the space between one breath and the next. So close your eyes or let them rest and listen, because tonight a story is waiting for you. Slowly, softly, one word at a time. The locksmith shop stood at the corner of a narrow old street where morning came softly through stone, wood, and mist. Before the bakers opened their shutters, before the first cartwheel crossed the square, Elowen unlocked the little wooden door and stepped inside. The shop greeted her in the way it always did, with the faint scent of oil, the dry breath of old wood, and the small brass murmur of keys resting against one another on their hooks. Elowen stood still for a moment. The counter was 3 steps ahead. The drawers were along the left wall. The workbench waited near the back window, and beside it was her father's old stool. She did not need to see clearly to know where things were. The shop had become a map in her hands, a map of edges, textures, distances, and sounds. She reached for the first key of the morning. It was small, cold, light between her fingers. She lifted it toward the window, trying to see the fine cut along its edge. But the line would not stay sharp. The metal softened. The little mark near the tip slipped away into blur. Elowen lowered the key. There had always been a weakness in her eyes. The old physician had warned her father years ago that it would deepen with time, slowly, not like a lamp going out, more like morning fog gathering around the edges of the world. So her father had taught her differently. He had not taught her to trust only sight. He had taught her the weight of a key, the patience of a lock, the sound of metal when it was almost ready to turn. Elowen remembered his voice clearly, more clearly now than his face. A lock does not open because you stare at it, he used to say. It opens when you listen to where it resists. She sat at the workbench, not on his stool, on her own. In front of her lay an old practice lock, dark with age, smooth at the corners, tired in the spring, but not broken. She placed the key inside. Her hand wanted to hurry. It always did on mornings when the world looked farther away than it had the day before. But she waited. She let the shop become quiet. Outside, a cart passed over the stones. Inside, one hanging key touched another. Elowen turned the key a little. There, a catch, a small resistance, not a refusal, a question. She turned back, then forward again, softer this time. The pin inside the lock shifted. Elowen smiled. The lock had not opened yet, but it had spoken. She chose a thin tool from the tray. A touch, a pause, a turn, another pause. is jammed, he said. 2 men tried yesterday. They said it was too old. Elowen heard the rest without him saying it. They had told him her sight was fading. They had wondered if she could still work. Perhaps he wondered too. She did not answer the doubt. She only touched the box. The lock had been forced more than once. She could feel that beneath her fingers. But the keyhole was too small, and the marks around it too faint for her eyes to trust. For one quiet moment, the old grief returned. The grief of reaching for a way that was no longer there. Then she breathed in and let it pass. My father used to say, she whispered, some people break a door and call it opened. She lifted the box closer to her ear. The man grew still. Elowen turned the small key once. A dull sound answered from inside. Not broken, only misaligned, only tired. She chose a fine file from the tray. The key was nearly right, a little too sharp at the end, a little too proud in one place. She could not see the difference clearly, but she could feel it where the brass rose against her thumb. She filed it once, slowly, then again, a smaller stroke. The sound was thin, almost like a whisper made of metal. A wrong key is not useless, her father used to say. It teaches you what the lock is asking you to change. She placed the key back into the lock. This time, it settled lower, quieter, as if it had found the place it had been asking for. Elowen turned it. A catch. A pause. Then a clean click. The little iron box opened. The man let out a breath. Not dramatic, not broken, only relieved. How did you see what was wrong? He asked. Elowen lowered the key into her palm. His face was soft trust every shape before her eyes, was beginning to hear where the world was ready to open. By late morning, the street had fully woken. Cartwheels passed over the stones. Voices rose and faded outside the window. Somewhere nearby, bread was being wrapped in paper. A shutter opened. A woman laughed. A door closed too quickly. And inside the little locksmith shop, Elowen placed each tool back where it belonged. The fine file, the soft cloth, the little practice lock, the narrow brass key. Her hands moved slowly, but they did not wander. They knew the shop better than her eyes did now. The counter, the trays, the wooden drawers along the wall, the small hook near the window where the lightest keys were kept. Outside the shop window, two women slowed as they passed. Elowen could not see their faces clearly, only their shapes, soft behind the glass. But she heard the way their voices lowered, not unkindly, not cruelly, only carefully, as people speak when they think kindness is the same as doubt. Poor thing, one voice murmured. Her father's hands were the finest in town. The other woman answered too softly for most ears, but Elowen heard it. Yes, but hands are not eyes. The two women moved on. Their steps faded down the street. Elowen stayed still. One hand rested on the edge of the counter. The other held a small brass key. The words did not wound her all at once. They settled slowly, like dust on a shelf, like mist on a window. Hands are not eyes. She had heard things like that before. Pity dressed as concern. Concern shaped like warning. Warnings softened until they almost sounded gentle. People did not always mean to make her smaller. Sometimes that was what made it harder. person can be damaged by a careful word. When she was younger, she had not understood him. She had thought damage always made a sound, wood cracking, metal bending, glass breaking. But now she knew some things were damaged quietly. A pause before someone trusted her. A voice that became too gentle. A customer who asked twice whether she was certain. Elowen did not blame them. The town had known her since she was small. They remembered her running through the shop with bright eyes, naming every key by sight. The long ones, the flat ones, the tiny brass ones with round heads, the iron keys too heavy for her pockets. They remembered her father as she stood on a stool beside him, trying to see over the workbench. Now they saw her pause before a drawer, step closer to a label, turn her face toward a voice before answering. They saw what was leaving. They did not always notice what was arriving. Elowen opened the third drawer on the left. It always stuck a little. Her fingers found the small row of blank keys inside. She sorted them by touch. One for cabinet locks, one for door locks, one for old boxes, one thin enough for delicate work. She laid them on the counter. Then she took the soft cloth and began to polish them one by one. The work calmed her. Metal against cloth, breath against silence. The slow return of shine, even when she could not see all of it. Near midday, the bell above the door trembled. A young messenger stood in the doorway. His cap was in his hands. His voice arrived before his courage did. Mistress Elowen. She lifted her head. Yes. There is a door at the old North House, he said. It will not open. Elowen listened, not only to the words, but to the small space after them. The boy swallowed. The carpenter tried. Then 2 men from the market. They think the lock is ruined. She asked, "When does it need opening?" he said, "if it can be done, if it can be done." The words stood between them, not sharp, but heavy. Elowen placed her hand on the workbench. For a moment, the shop seemed very quiet, too quiet. She could feel the boy watching her, waiting for hesitation, waiting, perhaps, for proof that the town was right to wonder. Elowen turned toward the wall of tools. She did not hurry. She chose the small leather roll first, then the narrow pick, the tension wrench, the fine file, a small oil bottle, a folded cloth. She placed each one inside the leather roll, by memory, by weight, by the little sound it made when it touched the others. Her father had once told her, "The weight of doubt is still weight. Do not carry all of it. Carry only the key." Elowen closed the leather roll. The little buckle gave a soft click. "Tell them not to force it again," she said. The boy looked up. "Not to force it?" "No," Elowen said. "A door remembers every hand that hurts it." The boy stood still for a breath. Then he nodded. "I'll tell them." He stepped back into the street. The bell moved once and settled. Elowen stood alone in the shop. Outside, the town continued without waiting. A cart rolled past. A vendor called out from the square. Someone laughed near the bakery. Life moved easily for people who did not have to think about every step, every label, every shadow, every face becoming less certain than the voice beneath it. Elowen reached for her cloak, then stopped. Her father's stool stood near the back window, worn at the edges, quiet in the pale light. She had not sat there since he died. She had her own stool, her own place, her own careful distance from the shape he had left behind. For a moment, she rested her fingers on the old wood. It was cool, smooth where his hand had touched it for years. She remembered him beside her, not as a clear face, but as a presence. The weight of his step, the low patience of his voice, the smell of oil and wool on his sleeves. "Elowen," he had once said, "people often trust what they can see. That is why they miss so much." She closed her fingers around the leather roll. Some believed in her father. Some doubted his daughter. Some wanted to be kind and still made her smaller. Elowen did not know yet whether she could open the north house door. The old north house was larger than most homes in town. Its doors were heavy. Its locks were stubborn. But she knew this much. She would not answer doubt by arguing with it. She would not explain herself to every whisper. She would not spend her strength trying to make people see what they had not yet learned how to notice. She would answer the way her father had taught her, slowly, patiently, with her hands steady and her ear close to the lock. Elowen lifted the leather case from the workbench. Then she crossed the shop, 3 steps to the counter, 4 to the door, one hand finding the frame. The street outside was bright enough to blur. The shapes of people moved through the morning, soft and unfinished, but the sounds were clear. A cartwheel turning, a child calling, a broom against stone, the distant creak of a door, waiting somewhere in the old north house. Elowen opened the shop door. The bell above her trembled, and for the first time that day, she stepped out. Not because the town believed she could, but because the lock had called. The house stood at the edge of town, where the stones became uneven, and the wind moved more freely between the walls. It was an old house, older than most. Its windows were narrow. Its door was tall and dark, and the iron lock beneath the handle had the tired look of something that had been asked too much by too many impatient hands. A small group had gathered near the steps. The carpenter, 2 men from the market, the young messenger, and an older woman who held a basket against her chest, as if she had forgotten why she was carrying it. Their voices lowered when Elowen arrived, not fully silent, not fully welcoming, only careful. Elowen heard it, the shift in breath, the pause before someone spoke, the small waiting sound people make when they are hoping not to be disappointed. The carpenter stepped forward. "We tried gently at first," he said. Elowen touched the edge of the door. The wood was cold. The grain was raised from years of rain. Near the lock, the surface had been scratched deeply, not by age, by force. She said nothing. The carpenter continued. "It may need to be broken out." One of the market men added, "It is an old lock. Sometimes old things are finished." Elowen rested her fingers beside the keyhole. The metal was rough, little bent, too warm on one side where many hands had gripped it. Her father's voice came to her quietly. Some people break a door and call it opened. She lowered her tool case to the step. Then she turned her face toward the group. Please stand back a little. No one argued, but no one moved quickly either. Elowen waited. At last, their boots shifted on the stones. A little space opened around her. She knelt before the lock. The ground was cold beneath her knees. The wind moved softly through the street. Somewhere behind her, a loose shutter tapped once against a wall. Then again, Elowen let the sound settle. The people, the wind, the house, the door. She did not begin with the tools. Not yet. She placed one hand flat against the old wood and the other lightly on the iron plate. Then she listened. At first, there was only silence, but silence was never empty, not if one waited long enough. She touched the handle. A small rattle answered. Loose, not broken. She pressed near the lock. The door gave a low wooden sigh, swollen from damp. She tried the key the messenger had brought. It entered halfway, then stopped. The market man behind her whispered, "Told you." Elowen did not turn. She did not answer doubt by turning toward it. She answered by staying with the lock. She drew the key back a little, then forward. A scrape, too high. She tilted it slightly. A dull catch. Too much pressure on the lower pin. She breathed in, slowly, then out. Her father used to say, if you cannot hear the lock, first listen to your own hand. A hurried hand speaks louder than the thing it touches. Elowen softened her grip. The key settled differently, lower, quieter. She took the narrow pick from her case. The metal was familiar between her fingers. She did not need to see its shape. She knew its weight, its balance, the tiny curve near the end. She placed it into the lock beside the key. The people behind her became still. softened, then resisted again. It was not refusing her. It was telling her where the pain was. A pin had been bent. A spring was weak. The plate had been forced out of line. No single problem, only many small injuries, each one making the next movement harder. Elowen understood that. She knew what it was to be mistaken for broken when something inside had only changed. She knew what it was to have people push where patience was needed. The wind moved through the street again. A key on her belt answered with a faint brass sound. The old woman with the basket whispered, "Can she do it?" No one replied. But this time, it did not enter her like dust. It passed over her like air. She turned the key back, then forward. Less force, more listening. The lower pin lifted. A small, clean sound followed. Then another. The lock was beginning to answer. Elowen leaned closer. Her cheek almost touched the cold iron. Her eyes could not give her the path, but the lock was giving it, piece by piece. Breath, turn. The handle moved, only slightly. One of the men stepped closer. Elowen lifted one hand. Not yet. He stopped. The lock had not opened. It had only trusted the first movement. Her father had told her once, the first opening is not the door. The first opening is permission to continue. Elowen adjusted the key one last time. The metal inside trembled. A tired spring shifted into place. Then, with a soft, final, the lock turned. For a moment, nothing else moved. Elowen placed her palm against the wood, then pushed. Not hard, only enough. The old north door opened inward with a long quiet. No one spoke. The sound stayed in the air, a patient sound, a sound that had not come from breaking, but from understanding. The carpet she said softly. Only tired. The old woman let out a slow breath. The market men said nothing. The young messenger smiled. That was enough. Elowen packed her tools, the narrow pick, the small cloth, the oil bottle, the key. One by one, each returned to its place. As she closed the leather roll, the carpenter, your father would have known what to do. Elowen paused. For a moment, the old ache rose again. Her father's face had grown difficult to hold. Some mornings she could remember only pieces. The line of his coat, the shape of his hands, the lamplight near his shoulder as he bent over the workbench. But his voice had remained, clearer than sight, steadier than memory. Yes, Elowen said. He would have listened. The carpenter lowered his eyes, not ashamed exactly, only thoughtful. Elowen lifted her tool case, then began the walk back toward the shop. The town sounded different on the way home. Or perhaps she was listening differently. A broom moved across stone. A child dragged a wooden wheel. A woman folded cloth. A door closed gently, without anger. Elowen heard all of it, not as noise, as presence. The world beyond her eyes was not empty. It was full of small invitations. By evening, she returned to the locksmith's shop. The street had softened into amber light. The windows across the road were blurred. Passing faces were only shapes now, warm and moving. Her sight had not returned. No miracle had come. No sudden brightness. No easy answer. The door that had closed before her eyes was still closed. And the loss was real. It would remain real. Some mornings would still hurt. Some faces would still fade. Some memories would still ask to be seen and not come clearly. But inside the shop, the keys were still waiting. The locks still carried their small, hidden questions. The drawers still knew her hands. The months she had not sat there. It had felt too final, too much like taking his place, too much like admitting he would not return. But that evening, after the old north door had opened, she understood something. Her father had not left the stool empty so she could mourn it forever. He had left it there so one day, when she was ready, she would know where to sit. Elowen touched the worn wood. Then, slowly, she sat down. The stool gave a small sound beneath her. Not a protest, not a welcome. Only old wood, accepting weight. She placed both hands on the workbench. A brass key rested beneath her fingers. Cool, simple, almost weightless. Yet in the right lock, it could change everything. Elowen smiled softly. Her father had left her the shop, the tools, the keys, but his true gift had been quieter than all of them. He had taught her that when one way closes, life does not always become easier. It does not erase what was lost. It does not turn pain into a lesson too quickly. But sometimes, if we stop forcing the dark, if we become patient enough to listen, another way begins to answer. Not loudly, not all at once, only with a small sound, a shift, a click, a turning. Elowen placed the key back on the workbench. Then she blew out the lamp. The shop settled into darkness, but around her, nothing felt empty. The keys were still there. The locks were still there. The quiet was still full of doors. And somewhere inside that quiet, Elowen understood.